All right. So the time is now a little past 7 o'clock. I'll call the meeting of the Maynard Planning Board to order here on Thursday, December 18th in Maynard Town Hall. I think the first item on our agenda here is we'll try to do some quick approval of minutes from October 28th. So everyone, I know Bill provided them via email earlier in the week. Do you want to have any discussion on those minutes? Is there any discussion on those minutes? I'm fine with the minutes. I'm fine with the minutes.
I'll stand, I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay. Okay. I will move that we approve the minutes as written. Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? All opposed? One abstained. So that's 3 in favor, none opposed, 1 abstained from voting on the minutes. So October 28th, 2014 minutes have been approved. We'll then move on to our first item on the agenda here, which is a presentation by the MAPC. And at this point, I'll pass it over to Bill so he can introduce our visitors and maybe give a little background on what we're in here.
Good evening. I'd like to, for our viewers at home, because I know this is going to be broadcast as well, in case they don't know, I'd like to give a little background on the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. This is a regional planning agency that serves the Boston area, the 101 cities and towns in the metropolitan Boston area. The mission is to promote smart growth and regional collaboration. They work towards sound municipal management, sustainable land use, protection of natural resources, efficient and affordable transportation, diverse housing, public safety, economic development, and informing the public. For those of you who haven't had a chance, MAPC has an excellent website at mapc.org. They have a strategic plan on there as well as a long-term vision on there, and it's just a wonderful resource to have. So I would encourage everybody to research that whenever they have a chance. We have 2 guests tonight that are going to be speaking to us. Jenny Raitt is the Assistant Director of Land Use and Planning and the Chief Housing Planner at MAPC. She's been at MAPC since 2007, providing direct housing and planning technical assistance to municipalities and engaging in regional and statewide housing policy initiatives. She co-manages the land use staff and coordinates the 8 coordinators of the MAPC sub-regional councils. Ms. Raitt holds a Master of Science degree in Nonprofit Management from the New School and a Bachelor of Arts in Urban Planning and Documentary Studies from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her current leadership appointments include serving as a board member of the Citizens Housing and Planning Association and member of the Legislative and Policy Committee for the American Planning Association. She chaired an LPC task force to draft a policy guide on aging in the community for the American Planning Association. Karina Milchman joined MAPC as a housing planner at the beginning of 2009. She currently works to achieve the housing goals of affordability and regional equity as set forth in MAPC's Metro Future Plan. She provides direct housing and planning technical assistance to municipalities, working closely with them to design housing production plans, investigate local housing concerns, and develop implementable strategies to realize their housing objectives. Her interests and expertise include issues of neighborhood change, housing need and demand analyses, and barriers to affordability and housing production. Karina holds a Master in City Planning and Certificate in Urban Design from MIT. There she completed mixed income housing proposals and neighborhood plans for public and private clients. Her graduate research explores publicly subsidized, middle-income, affordable housing in high-cost urban markets with a focus on New York City. Karina completed her undergraduate degree in studio art with a minor in art history at Tufts University, where she studied the intersection of urbanization and Romantic era. The purpose of the presentation tonight is this is an introduction to work that's been done so far on our housing production plan. As you may know, we applied and received a grant last year from MAPC to conduct this work, and we've applied for a subsequent funding in 2015. We hope we'll be able to build on this. That very possibly may turn into an element of our master plan or a component of it, or it may end up being an additional housing plan. At this point, we don't know, but we've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to work with MAPC, and they've been a big help to us in my short time here. So at this time, I think Jenny's going to start.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm Jennifer Raitt with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and I'm joined by my colleague, as you know, Karina Milchman, who's going to be making most of the presentation, but I'm going to just kick it off by going through just sort of the basics of putting together a housing production plan, which you tell me. I want to thank the town also for even inviting us to work with them on this plan. It's been a great process, and we hope that we can continue it. So tonight we're going to go through the housing production plan, just sort of the project overview. Then Karina will talk with us about the housing needs and demand analysis that she's been conducting for Maynard, and then we'll talk about the next steps. So what are housing production plans? Under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40B, there is a mechanism by which communities who have not achieved a year-round inventory of at least 10% of their year-round housing as affordable can create a housing production plan to help them to achieve their housing production goals. So a housing production plan has a number of different elements to it. One of them is the process that we've been going through for the last number of months, looking at the housing needs and housing demand in the area, as well as really assessing what kind of housing might be appropriate in Maynard, where might that housing be located, and to also set with that a numerical target for housing production annually. If it's an approved plan by the Department of Housing and Community Development, then you actually can have an approved plan for 5 years. If you achieve that numerical goal, it can provide a stay, depending upon how much you achieve, for 1 or 2 years from comprehensive permit proposals. There are many communities that have both approved housing production plans as well as certified housing production plans. In most of those communities, there's basically 5 components that make for successful implementation. There's not like a special ingredient or mix that goes with it, but any one of these things can help you to produce your housing production or get to your goals. So one of them, first and foremost, is really the town leadership demonstrating a real commitment to those housing production goals. And by commitment, that typically means it infiltrates in your board and commission work, as well as maybe educating the general public about why you're going about moving forward with a housing production plan. And that can come through in a lot of different ways. It can come through in adopting or amending existing policies, committing local funds to a housing project. There are other ways in which you can demonstrate that kind of commitment and leadership. Part of that could be potentially working with developers on what's called a friendly 40B. So that would mean that if a developer has a proposal for maybe higher density or multifamily housing that would not typically be allowed in a particular zone, the town would work hand in hand with that developer in order to take them through the process and support such a development. And there are many examples of that across the state, of communities working with developers who are working towards producing the kind of housing that the town needs and is looking for, a city, and then allowing that through a comprehensive permit, because the comprehensive permit is just saying that the Zoning Board of Appeals recognizes that you don't have that kind of zoning in place, so it's like basically a variance to allow for that kind of housing, and in this case through a comprehensive permit under 40B. You could also work in partnership with nonprofit organizations. Some nonprofits who are affordable housing developers can actually achieve different scales of affordable housing production, as well as reach households who might have lower income level needs. So those partnerships can be instrumental, particularly if you have those kinds of needs in your community. Zoning for affordability, as I mentioned, one key thing is a community who can recognize that not only is it you want to have the housing produced, but you want to amend or at least look at your zoning to think about where you can make improvements to increase affordability. So that might mean looking at adoption of an inclusionary zoning bylaw, which would allow for at least a certain percentage of any housing, any new proposed residential development to have a set aside for affordable housing. Or looking at your existing zoning bylaws, for example, a cluster zoning bylaw or an overlay zoning district where you do not currently allow for a bonus or some sort of provision for affordable housing, making that amendment so that that can be incorporated into your zoning ordinance or bylaw. And then, of course, lastly, the municipal organization, leadership, and oversight. Alongside that commitment to housing production goals is often making a change in some regard to the organization within your municipality. So whether it's the creation of a municipal affordable housing trust fund or some other entity that is helping to advocate for affordable housing or providing the fiduciary responsibility for that affordable housing to be developed. So the housing production plan has 4 components. First one we're wrapping up right now, which is this comprehensive housing needs and demand assessment. So that's looking at the housing needs throughout the community, which we're going to hear about in a moment. Looking at different populations and households, so everything from elderly to families to other household types, and what are their specific needs? Are they facing a cost burden, et cetera? And then a demand assessment is looking at what is the current demand for housing and what is the projected demand for housing and what types of housing might that be. The second phase of work, if you move forward with that second phase, would be to establish, based upon what you've heard from the housing needs and demand assessment, what kinds of goals would be realistic for the community to set forth, and then what strategies could help get you there to achieving those goals. If there are development barriers in any way, regulatory or non-regulatory barriers, how can you move forward away from those constraints and address them to move forward with development? And then, of course, an implementation plan, which lays out who will be responsible, which entities in the town will be responsible for moving it forward, in what timeline, and are any resources needed to make that happen. So for the phase 2, which I know we're going to loop back to at the end, we have listed in this grid basically the sort of partner involved. In this case, it's MAPC or planning staff or board, and then the Board of Selectmen, and what their specific roles are. So the next phase of work after this, as Bill had mentioned, if the DLTA funds are awarded so that we can continue, the next phase would be additional research, facilitating some public forums to gain additional input on the goals and strategies, drafting the plan, and then of course submitting it to DHCD, as well as presenting it to the planning board formally, as well as the Board of Selectmen. We would need from the planning staff to provide additional information, provide reviews, and of course do the outreach. The planning board, as well as the Board of Selectmen, would also be able to review the draft, provide feedback verbally or in written form, and to ultimately adopt the plan. The plan can't move forward to DHCD until it's adopted at the local level in those 2 entities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karina, who's going to run through the key findings from the housing needs and demand assessment.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to take you through what I learned about Maynard based on the data analysis I've done so far. And our findings fall into 3 categories. Population, so as Jenny mentioned, what are the needs of the community, what's the demand? Housing stock, that goes into the type of housing we have here, the age of it, and so forth. And then affordability, which is really the intersection of the 2. How well does the housing stock meet the needs and demand of the population in terms of costs? So to start things off, we looked at population, and you can see that population grew in Maynard between 1990 and 2000, and then it sort of dropped rather steeply going into 2010, 3% in 10 years. So MAPC, for our Metro Future plan, our regional plan, developed projections that are based on an analysis of how changing trends in birth, death, migration, and housing occupancy might result in higher population growth, as well as a larger workforce and greater housing demand. So based on these projections, we expect that over the next 15 years, the population decline Maynard has experienced recently will reverse, and by 2030 we'll be back up near the 1990 levels. So to date, Maynard's population has been aging. Between 1990 and 2010, the under 35 population declined by 15%, while the 55 and over population increased by 7%. Going forward, looking at 2020 and 2030, the sort of yellow and orange-hued bars, this trend is going to continue. So between 2010 and 2030, the rate of decline for the 35 and under age cohort is projected to stay constant at 15%, But the 55 and plus population is projected to increase by 40%, so quite significantly. So even though we're seeing this sort of general aging of the population in Maynard, school enrollment has begun to increase in recent years. You can see beginning in 2010, 2011 school year, school enrollment has gone up by about a classroom size until you get to the 2013-2014 year where it jumps. So other communities are also experiencing some increased school enrollment, even as other data indicates that, you wouldn't expect that necessarily. But it's not at all clear from the data that this trend is going to continue long term. It's probably cyclical and will level out in a few years. The broader demographic trends that I'm talking about and will continue to talk about tonight indicate that increased school enrollment at a regional level is not likely. So looking at households, 63% of households in Maynard are family households, so related individuals living together. Household size in Maynard is shrinking, and that has to do with the population decline. It also has to do with a couple other factors that I'm going to get into right now. Going forward, though, even though in the last couple decades Maynard has seen a decline in the number of households, we're projecting that this is going to reverse, same as we're projecting the population loss will reverse. And that's because households are getting smaller, as we just saw, so there are more people forming households and seeking housing units. So rather than, say, 3 people seeking 1 unit, it's 2.5 people. I'm sorry, it's 3 people seeking 2 units. And so on. Looking at income in Maynard, there's quite a wide range of income levels. Median household income is $79,441. So that's the middle, but it really varies a lot if you look at it by household type, family versus non-family. So median family income is $103,750. And median non-family income is $40,625, so less than half what family income is, which makes sense. Now, if we look at income level by age cohort, you can see that the majority of households on the younger end of that spectrum, 25 to 44, those householders earn $100,000 or more a year, about 3/4 of them. Then that number drops slightly for the 45 to 64-year-old cohort. And then by the time you get to the seniors, 65 years and older, there's a much more varied income distribution. 1/4 of those householders earn less than $20,000 a year, and another 31% of them earn between $20,000 and $39,999. So, looking at by age at what kind of housing units these householders occupy. Younger and older residents are more likely to rent. 100% of the 15 to 24-year-old householders rent. 52% of the 75 to 84-year-old householders rent. And 44% of the 85 plus householders rent. But as you can see, there's significant numbers of renters in the middle just because of the breakdown. So now moving on to housing stock. The housing stock in Maynard is majority single family, but there's a third that's multifamily, and that's actually pretty high for the subregion that Maynard is in, where you see a larger portion, typically, of single family. And the other thing to note is that not only is a third multifamily, but there's a good range in there in terms of how many units are in each structure. There are a lot of units that are more than 2 family, or even 3 to 4 family units there. And this is important because single family housing tends to be less affordable to people. It's more costly to maintain and harder to maintain. So looking at housing demand going forward into the future, we can see that demand for multifamily units is going to be strong. It just barely edges out demand for single family units. The reason why, typically when we look regionally at these projections, we see greater demand for multifamily compared to single family. And I think one of the reasons why it's pretty close in Maynard is because you do have a supply of multifamily housing already here. Let's see. So I want to compare those projections to historic permitting trends to kind of see whether the town is on track to meet demand. Maynard issued 203 total permits in a 13-year period between 2000 and 2013. So that's 54 units less than the projected demand we just saw on the previous slide, and that was over a 10-year period. Of the permits issued between 2000 and 2013, 127 were for single-family units, and 76 were for multifamily units. That's compared to the projected demand for 126 single-family units and 131 multifamily units. So to meet projected demand, the town needs to support development at a faster rate for both housing types, and particularly for multifamily. Getting into sale prices and rents. The median home sale price in Maynard in 2014 was $296,080. Since 2012, you can see that prices have increased pretty significantly for single-family home sales, 15% increase, and for condos, 21% increase. So there was that dip around 2011, 2012, and now things are on the rise again. Looking at rent, you can see that the median annual gross rent in Maynard is on the lower end for the Magic subregion where we're located. And the other important thing to note about the median is that it's lower than fair market rent for all unit sizes. Fair market rent is determined by HUD to assess income eligibility for a lot of the units in their housing programs. And so a studio fair market rent right now is in the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy area is just over $1,071. A one bedroom is about $1,200, two bedroom $1,500, and so on. So the median rent in Maynard is lower. Now looking at affordability. 33% of all households are low income in Maynard, and that means that they earn less than 80% of AMI. Again, it's a metric that was devised by HUD, and it really depends on household size. So just to give you some sense, for an individual, low income would be an annual income no greater than $47,450. For a family of four, it'd be an annual household income less than $67,750. So you can see that a large percentage of the low-income households in Maynard fall into this elderly non-family category or this other category, as well as small related families. And then looking at cost burden, Jenny mentioned this briefly. I want to delve into a little more. More than a third of the households in Maynard are cost burden. That means that they spend more than 30% of their annual income on housing costs. HUD typically considers a rate of 30% of households to be if they're cost burden to be an issue in a community. So Maynard is at 37%. Interestingly, the rate is higher for renters than owners. Typically, we tend to see the reverse. Most of the cost-burdened households in Maynard are low income, perhaps unsurprisingly. Middle-income households earning between 80 and 120% of AMI, so that's between $67,750 and $113,000 for a family of four. They experience very low rates of cost burden. And then looking at the subsidized housing inventory, this actually, it says April, but I just updated it to December per THCD. So the town's not quite at the 10% state target that Jenny mentioned. You're at 8.3%. That's actually the median SHI for Magic subregion. You're making progress. It was at 8.1%, 8.2% in April. So part of the housing production planning process that we're going to be pursuing pending DLTA will be devising strategies to help get to that 10% target as well as meet local needs and demand at the same time. And then I just want to talk briefly about next steps. So as Bill mentioned, as Jenny mentioned, we are, the town has submitted a proposal to get 2015 direct local technical assistance funding, and we'll be reviewing it. Pending that, we're going to start working towards the first public forum where we'll share the findings that I just shared with you, and we'll discuss housing opportunities and challenges in Maynard and start devising goals and housing objectives. Then we're going to sort of bring that back to the office. We're going to do some additional research on development constraints, physical, regulatory, and so on. We would do some mapping. And then we would bring the housing goals and strategies that were discussed at the first public forum, edited down, bring them back to a second public forum to discuss them, make sure we heard everything correctly, we're on the right track, and prioritize them, talk a little bit about implementation strategies. Then we'll finalize that draft, we'll discuss it with town staff, and we will go before the planning board and board of selectmen to get the plan adopted. And once that's done, we'll submit the plan on behalf of the town to DHCD and work with them to have it approved. So I didn't pause for questions, so I'll do that now. If there's any questions or comments you want to share, please do so. And thank you.
Would you like to light some?
Sure.
Use this for questions.
I have a question. It's for clarification, but I find it hard to believe that the rents in Sudbury are lower than the rents in Maynard. So that's just a comment.
Yeah, so the, let's see, let's go back to that slide. So this is census data. There's no good really market data for Maynard and a number of these magic communities because they're small enough that Zillow and PadMapper and these other aggregates don't pick them up. Census data is routinely underestimates market rents, so that might explain the discrepancy you're noting. And it's an unfortunate effect of limited data availability for smaller towns.
One as well. So, did you look at the percentage of affordable housing as a percentage of developable land in Maynard?
We haven't done that on this phase yet. I believe that the town has done some analysis of that. Bill wants to speak to it, and Jenny might have comments.
Right now, we've submitted that to DHCD. We did a calculation that puts us considerably over our minimum based on land percentage. Right now, it was, what was, yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
2 point something above the 1.5 requirement.
Right, brother. And right now, we've sent a letter to DHCD stating that we feel that we're compliant, and we sent the backup data. We haven't heard one way or the other on that, but so hopefully, we would rather be, of course, in a position where we're looking at a friendly 40B rather than be under the gun like that. But that.
So just to clarify, the way that the general land area minimum works is that if you have a comprehensive permit proposal go to your zoning board of appeals for an approval, then you can deny that permit on the basis of the computation and research that you've done to compute the general land area minima, which meets the statutory minima. Sorry for all these different minimas. One of the ways to meet the statutory minima is by producing affordable housing to put it on the subsidized housing inventory, which is managed by the Department of Housing and Community Development. The other mechanism is by proving that you meet this general land area minima. The only time it's triggered, though, is in the event of having to argue, you deny the permit, and then it goes through a process of submission to DHCD by which they have a period of time to respond to the town to agree or disagree as part of an appeals process. So that's how they will respond, only if you end up having a proposal presented to the ZBA, just to clarify.
Also, I'd ask about, back to the, real quick on the question about Sudbury rents. Sudbury, I assume, has a certain amount of 40B. Are they, and so
Yes.
perhaps, and I don't know their rental numbers, but perhaps the bulk of their rental numbers are from subsidized units, because that could probably
You
contribute
can
to
go
it.
back to the slide with the subsidized housing inventory. We can use that as a point of reference. Yeah, so Sudbury has 5.98% of their units listed, year-round housing units on their subsidized housing inventory. That gross rent amount could capture subsidized as well. It would be any rental units. It's also a median number, so it's capturing everything from a studio and efficiency all the way to a 4-bedroom, I believe. It's kind of capturing everything. May not be the best, number, and Karina can go on about it more, but I just want to say, sorry, is that Sudbury is doing very, very active things to produce affordable housing. I just want to make that clear. So they have a housing trust, they have community preservation similarly.
Oh, yeah, yes.
And they do a lot of active work working with nonprofit organizations to produce affordable housing. Just wanted to put that out there.
Another factor to consider is, while Sudbury's only at 5.9% towards their number for the SHI, it may represent 90% of their rental units.
That's what, yeah.
So, that could push that median cost down, as Bill suggested. It's not all the cost of housing, it's just the rental costs.
And the essence is that our rents are lower right now. That was
We have 30% of our housing is renting, only 8% of it being affordable.
Right.
So our number would be higher just from that metric right there. I had a question for Karina as well. One of your early slides on the population trends. So the projections coming from the census and other work that you did does not consider, the slide before that please, does not consider potential development. Is that correct? That you're just looking at the trends of demographics in a community, but not that this town is going to build 10 houses or 1,000 houses?
So our model, our projections, or the model that informs our projections does consider development potential, development pipeline, recent development trends, and so forth. It takes that into account.
Okay. So can you speak to what development trends you might have applied to our next 15 years of growth?
I cannot. I can get back to you with that information, but I can't speak it to that level of detail in terms of the specific development trends in Maynard that informed the output of our projections, because it's a regional model, so it incorporates those local level data, but I'm not sure exactly what the model is.
Okay. And then the slide that talks about the households. It's got some. It's up to about 40. Yeah, that one.
Yep.
Thank you. So how do you define a household first? I can understand the numbers there.
So households are both families and non-families living together in a unit. It's basically the individual or the group of individuals that occupies one unit. That's a household.
Okay. So from the town's perspective, we have somewhere around 4,200 or 4,300 residential units in the community today.
Right.
And we can see the projection growth there.
There'll be greater demand for more units.
Even though we think we're going to grow 400 units on this model, our population's only going to grow by 200 people.
That's because there are more households than population, because one of the reasons is that family size is declining. Yeah.
Although, I mean, just to clarify, these people have to be split in half, right? They each
Well,
have
talk too big.
The population's going to go up by 200 people, but the housing's going to go up by 400 units. They each have to have 2.
No, but if your family was 4 and now it's 3.
Right, but this is just population increase versus household increase, right?
But the family of 4 now is occupying 2 houses with 2 people in each.
Right.
That's what Karina's saying.
Or 3
Right,
with
but
one
we're only
person
talking
in
about
one,
2
and
additional people.
yeah.
But some of
And
that.
400 units. Like, no matter how you divide it up.
But I think the base changes, right? So, what's there now doesn't stay at 4 or whatever. The number is over 20 years. I think it assumes that the household size and houses that exist goes down because of churn or change or whatever also.
The other question I had is,
Explains the difference.
Population still isn't returning to, as you pointed out, by 2030, 1990 levels.
Not quite.
So in theory, the people who lived here in 1990 had a place to live, they weren't just milling around the street. So would
Well,
we,
but family size was bigger, so it was more people in fewer units.
That's making perfect sense. I just want to clarify, make sure I understood that. I have a couple more questions if you guys will give me the.
Yeah, let me do one more clarification.
Sure.
If you go back to that age breakdown slide. The big thing, and this is one of the things, this slide is a big informant of how we've been doing the population projections moving ahead, is this trend that's happening on this slide, these trends in each age cohort is something that's happening throughout the region where family size is declining. That's one. The other big issue is the baby boomers getting older, and so you see the projection growth in the older populations, and they're growing, but they're also there are more of those households and those individuals than there are the younger individuals from age 20 to age 54, overarchingly. So, but particularly though, the age, it's 5 to 19, that's a little misleading. We're losing people, this is across the state, but also in the greater Boston region, in this particular age cohort. It's roughly 19 to 34, who are either moving out or not finding a place to live. That's a trend that's happening throughout the region. And then on top of that, the other end of the population age cohorts are growing older, and there are more of them.
You can see like right now the biggest age cohort is 35 to 54, and going into our projection years to 2020, 2030, they're going to be getting much older. They'll be maybe empty nesters, so the more people or fewer people, more households. Yeah.
Just building off that for a minute, and I haven't completely thought this through, but just anecdotally, I've seen kind of a different trend in Maynard. I guess I'm wondering if this is based on regional data or like Maynard kind of specific data, because I feel like Maynard in this subregion is maybe more affordable than a lot of the other towns to buy a house. So I've seen, just on my street alone, I've seen a lot of older couples move out and younger couples move in, probably the 20 to 34 range. So just wondering if this is based on regional data or actually Maynard-specific data, because I've seen the opposite trend happening.
I concur, just in what I've seen happen.
And you see it in the school enrollments as well. You're seeing a lot of young families coming to Maynard, I think because of the affordability. So I'm just wondering how those numbers are calculated.
Sure. Yeah, it's based on a combination of local data, local municipal data. We also looked at each subregion, which is a construct of Metropolitan Area Planning Council. Sorry, we didn't explain that before. So we keep saying MAGIC. Sounds exciting. It's the name of one of our subregions. We have 8 because we have 101 communities. So within each subregion, we also looked at the trends as well as in each municipality. And then also, of course, the bigger picture regional trends. And by the way, the region, in the case of these projections, is beyond the 101 communities. For the transportation study area, it's actually 164 communities. So we go out pretty far to do the study and performance on trends and projections.
Which towns are in our subregion?
Oh, that's what's on there.
On your third slide, starting out, you mentioned the housing production plans, and the third bullet was to set a numerical goal for annual low and moderate income housing. And further on, you mentioned that a third of the households in Maynard are already low income. You're not suggesting that we move to increase that number.
We are not saying that. What could be the case is that there's already a set of people who are living in Maynard who would be technically eligible to live in housing that's created, that's affordable to people who are earning at or below 80% of the area median income. But it's not an automatic that we're saying more people are moving in necessarily. It could be service to the people who are already living here. The same thing when we talk about production. Production doesn't always necessarily mean new units. It could mean taking an existing building and creating a unit. So there's not necessarily a new home built or constructed. So it could be looking at existing as well as the existing population. You can continue.
Just to follow on that quickly, were you saying that, you're saying 37% of households were cost burden, right?
33 are low income, and
Right.
The other one was cost
and or 37% are cost burdened.
So it's
Yeah,
not a question that they're living in, they may not be able to afford where they live, they're just
Right.
cost burden.
well, which is why we looked at cost burden by income level as well, because if you're cost burdened and you're a middle or upper income, it might just be because you have too much house. It might be by choice, but usually lower income households who are cost burdened, it's not a function of that kind of choice.
I think though that this question about income was on another slide where
Yes.
you did the income breakout,
Right.
the stack.
Oh, the income distribution?
Yeah.
Yep.
No,
Next
I'm
one.
sorry,
Next
the next one. Yeah, this one. This one shows that there's a certain number of households who are already technically, I'm putting that in quotes because I'm not proving that they're actually eligible, but technically based upon this data, you know, we
I
can
think
say that they
my
might be
other
eligible.
comment is, numbers don't always tell the whole truth, and the numbers in the schools can be very misleading. It doesn't mean that there aren't children in Maynard. There aren't children, those children aren't in Maynard schools necessarily. And I think that's a critical thing. When you see that dip, you don't realize that because our schools were in danger of failing an accreditation because of a physical plan, and parents chose to take their children out of Maynard and send them somewhere else. And then when the new high school opened up, back they came. The other thing is we now have an international program that has brought, and those are soft numbers. You could choose next year not to do that. But I think you have to interpret those numbers carefully.
That's helpful information.
So, yeah, Karina, my question is related to that. So, on that slide where you show the population by age groups, if you look at those numbers for the current decade, it's right about where our school enrollment is. If you take our school enrollment, including Aspet Valley, it's around 1,500. And it looks like that yellow bar is right around 1,500. And I agree with what Alan Duggan has said. The numbers don't tell the whole story, but whatever the exact number is, it's pretty close to where we see the numbers based on the information we do have from the two school districts that serve us. Certainly some children go to private schools and stuff, and I don't have that data. But my interest in this slide is how much of the trend that we see there, particularly in the younger age group, is based on birth rate data versus just raw census. So are we seeing that trend, that declining trend? And will we see that decline show up in schools? It looks to me like the yellow bar of 0 to age 4, the non-school age children, is equivalent to say, the 12 years following it. So if the birth rate remains level, that 1,500 number for the school age children will remain level for the foreseeable future. But do you know if that trend is rising or falling for that, the previous 5 years of birth? Am I making any sense of that question?
I'm not sure I follow you. It is based on birth rates amongst other trends.
We have about 1,500 children that are school age in town. We've got about 500 that are not school age yet.
Yeah.
If the birth rate continues, that's only 4 years, and then school age is longer. So
Right.
is the birth rate rising or falling currently? So like, what will we see in the next 20 years in our schools?
I see. Yeah. The birth rate in Maynard is on the decline, according to recent
You
data.
do have 2030 data there. Like
We do.
the orange bar
Projections.
would be projection 15 years out.
Right, and it's slightly lower for the 0 to 4, but not
That was taking us
significantly.
into most of their school years. So that was what I was getting at.
Yeah.
But the 5 to 19 bar is quite a bit lower.
Quite a bit.
15 years from now.
Yeah, and so that also, might have to do with out-migration and mobility. These are other variables that are imputed into the model. Any other questions, comments?
So the recommendations about housing types that the town might be interested in promoting comes from the phase 2.
Yeah, so it definitely involves a public process where we'll host a forum and speak with the community. And and it also involves additional research where we want to look at development potential in town, what's realistic in terms of new units or preservation or conversion of market rate to affordable, as Jenny mentioned. And then we put it all together and develop housing goals with the community and town staff.
Will you also be looking at, besides just affordable housing, but like types of housing, like, excuse me, cold, like elderly care or assisted living? Will that be included in that, or is it just going to be based on kind of income levels?
No, it's definitely based on age and ability,
Okay.
and so on. I mean,
So if recommendations are made, it will be not just affordable or not affordable, but rather different types and services provided.
definitely,
Okay.
yeah. And again, what comes out is a large function of not just the data analysis, but also what we hear from the community. So if people come out to the public forum and we hear that and it echoes the data and vice versa, then that's a strong indication that it should be a priority.
Certainly, some of the numbers that you talked about tonight, our population is aging. And the population is this trend. And we are disproportionately, our seniors are cost burdened based on the numbers. And we're also short what would multifamily or smaller units. Those are clear takeaways. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Yes.
I think the other thing you have to consider too is that we are surrounded by wealthy communities. And a lot of those, once their children are gone, they come to Maynard. They move into condos, they move into small homes. So you need to, I think you need to take that into consideration too. In any housing, I've seen that, I know lots and lots of people who have done that. We've come from Sudbury and Akron and Concord and so forth into Maynard once their children are out of the schools.
The other thing, just in reference to the income slide, like there's sort of, again, it's like a part of the picture is missing, right? So, anecdotally I can talk about people I know, but in general I can talk about things that people do from the university level where income isn't the whole story, right? Like if you have a guy who has $10 million but doesn't make any money, he shows up as dirt poor and needs help here. But that's not the case, right? And so folks that might be coming in from some of the surrounding towns, downsizing, looking for a more urban, walkable sort of experience, I'm not saying that's everyone, I'm not even saying it, but it's just another piece of the puzzle that needs to be considered. So it'd be interesting actually to see, the same graphs done with, sort of a net worth to compare to, if that's something that can even be done.
Do we have a lot of those $10 million people?
No, but you don't, I don't know, right?
Yes.
No one knows.
I wanted to make one other comment about what Andrew was talking about earlier, with the population change and the housing units. With the elderly population, they show up as one household, and they're often two people on today's chart. But next year, some of those will be one person. And so you're going to see these population shifts. As the population is aging, they still need one house. But now it's, it used to be 3 people or 4 people, then it goes to 2, and then it goes to 1. And it's a very weird thing that we see in the demand for housing. I already talked about downsizing. It's a really big issue. And we may see when we do the phase 2 that there's the demand for housing in this town may be strictly smaller units, just based on how the population is aging. I'm not suggesting that's the case, but I can imagine that might be what we see come out of it. That would explain some of that discrepancy in the population growth and the unit growth. It is a little
Yeah, although to Max's point, I'd like to see more data or better data on this. Like it doesn't see. I mean, I understand that nationally, worldwide, et cetera, like there's an aging issue with populations, but it just doesn't seem that way here, right? And especially because we're a town that's so out of character with every other town in our region that you list, right? Like the only place that I see Maynard and Concord compared is like on a map or in this, right? Because they're plainly 1,000 degrees apart from one another. So it's difficult, I think, to draw generalizations from, it's like the similarities between zebras and koalas, well, they're animals.
So within this subregion, there are 2 community types according to MAPC's categorization. And, there are other towns within the subregion that are the same community type, which is a maturing suburb as Maynard, and you know, more of them might be, I forget what's the other one, developing suburb. But
What are the criteria
you're not
for those
alone.
two?
So, and it has to do with density, it has to do with how built out the towns are, it has to do with what kind of development opportunities are there. Is it infill, is it subdivision, you know, what potential is there, and a number of other factors. So,
Because the only town I thought was even remotely similar to us is Hudson. Right?
They are similar.
But the others, you know, it's night and day.
Well, it's important, given that you're looking at a market, you have to look at neighboring communities.
Oh,
That's
sure,
how you
absolutely.
create, especially to the point about people from Sudbury are coming here, or that's still a neighboring, they may not be similar,
But
but
then
there are
when you-
impacts
when
and
you
they're
make-
impacting your
Sure.
community in
When
some
you-
way.
when you
They may
make
not be
this-
likened, but they're still similar in other ways
Oh, sure.
related to demand.
But the other thing is, if you look at demand across, if someone's saying, well, I want to come to this region, you know, we're already dramatically, you know, it's more affordable than any town on that list, except Hudson. Right, you know. So, and that's what I've always been struck by this town, like, you know, there's obviously legal technicalities around the whole 40B thing that have been discussed, but, you know, I think it was the year we moved here, which was 10 years ago now. The third cheapest town in eastern Massachusetts was Maynard.
I think it'll become critical in your next phase to really try and get as much of a cross, you know, as many representatives of all those age groups as possible. And the town should be, you know, encouraged to try to reach out, not just to the old, you know, what they say about, you know, a camel being a horse that a committee worked on, or, you know, a blind person touching an elephant in the ear and thinking that's what the whole elephant looks like. So I do think that we need to reach out to the seniors, we need to reach out to the young people with children, without children, the, you know, the empty nesters and all of those kinds of people to get that sense of.
absolutely, I couldn't
But
agree more.
There's also theoretically a marketing aspect to what you build attracts people
Yep.
from outside of Maynard.
Right.
So if we built a lot of smaller, intended for elderly housing, it wouldn't necessarily just fill needs here, it would also attract more people so you can influence the model
Right.
in lots of ways or not, depending on what you want to achieve.
So building on that, that's just what Bill said, one of the takeaways was that there's a shortage of multifamily housing, but you showed this pie chart of sorts, and maybe someone's one who's done it. In your, and that's, yeah, this one, so your comment was that almost a third of multifamily was high.
It's high for the sub-region, absolutely. And that's why I like the projections. That
So-
projected demand for 131 multifamily units would be much higher, according to our model, if you guys didn't already have this strong supply of multifamily housing.
I guess that seems in conflict to what was just stated as the takeaway, is that there's a shortage.
There's an
Is that
overall
that?
shortage of units in terms of meeting current and projected demand. Does that make sense?
So a third of the housing stock is not sufficient to meet the needs of our population.
Exactly.
Meaning, if your population grows according to these projections, you currently don't have enough housing units or the right types of housing units to meet that projected demand. Now, if you just don't grow, then
You don't have to worry about it. Or the unit cycle, as much, or, well, you could decide not to grow. Or you can choose to cycle through your existing housing inventory, which is probably, to a certain extent, over those years where there were less permitting and that's what was happening. You were, sales of existing units or rentals.
Or if you end up going in a way that's not as reflected in the production.
That's right. Right.
Which may in fact be the objective.
I don't
Or
know.
maybe the case.
I think there's a danger too if you're suggesting multi and rental as opposed to owner occupied, because that can change the complexion of a town. Home ownership versus rental, I think is very important to take consideration of. Very important from my perspective.
Yeah, well, as you can see, we're not projecting a decline in demand for ownership units. In fact, there's a decline in rental single-family units. But you can see the ownership, especially for single-family demand, is pretty robust. It's a you know, it's about finding the right balance for your community, for sure.
So back to the pie chart, yeah, that one. So what's the, I guess, what is more typical breakdown for the Magic communities?
You know, as you were saying, Maynard is unique from a lot of the other municipalities in the subregion in several ways, and this is one of them. And typically we see closer to, you know, high 70s, 80s, single family ratio. And then on the multifamily side, it's typically predominantly 2-family, maybe 3 to 4, very few, and you know, certainly 7%, 10 to 19 units is pretty remarkable in this area. But you all,
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Okay. No, I was just going to say the other part to this that is not like the surrounding communities, since we're on that, and it's an important point that you've made, and I think we should continue on it, is that the blue part, the 20-plus units, is sometimes very large, and then the only other color is the yellow of the single family. The reason being 40B is that there's a large number of projects that have 100 plus 200, 300 units. In a couple cases, Act and Concord both have permitted those kinds of projects, and Littleton, which was on there.
I have a question. Can you go back to the slide that just had the sort of projected numbers of units needed? Yeah, that one. I guess what this begs the question in my mind, what type of single family unit, I guess, because, just thinking of some of the projects that we've been looking at over the last year and a half, I mean, there's the decisions that we make as a board affect the market price of those units, and so is there a take home in terms of how to target what type of single family unit? I mean, we have a project now that I think, the applicant has stated that, he's targeting, the highest end of prices in Maynard. These would be homes that would be among the most expensive in town. And so that would be 7 or 8 of those 137, but is that at the right place? I don't know.
So I think we have to put the data together as well as the community feedback, but in terms of type, tenure, and affordability levels to find, a more nuanced mix. That's right. But yeah, I mean, certainly 137 single-family ownership units, all at the very high end of the market, is probably not going to meet, the broad range of demand and needs going forward in the next 15 years.
We don't break down this number by income and who it would be affordable to. The 137 number is not broken down into, you need, 10 of those units to be for luxury, 700,000 plus, and then 20, or we don't have that level of depth in these projected numbers. That's the part that Karina's saying would be next, to think about how to break that down.
You mean for us to think about?
Well, you can think about it, but I mean, phase 2, as part of this project, we could vet that out a little bit more carefully.
Together. Yes, together. Of course, you can continue talking about it. Yeah.
One of the things that we look at internally is beyond the types of units, is the number of bedrooms.
Mm-hmm.
So is that part of that, the type of analysis that you would then have us talking about in that phase 2?
Yeah, I think absolutely.
Which obviously relates to what Greg's talking about in terms of the total value of the property is impacted by those sorts of things.
Yeah, so I've done some analysis so far on your existing inventory in terms of number of bedrooms and unit sizes. Our projections, as of now, don't go into that level of detail, but it is something that could be a subject at the forum, and definitely something that we continue to research and continue to discuss, because that's obviously very important, whether you want to do 137 micro units. I'm just kidding.
Just one further comment on the pricing question. Greg was just thinking about this, like talking about the top end of the Maynard market, and then you said 700,000 means you don't know the Maynard housing market, because that's way beyond the top end of the Maynard.
I was going to prove a point.
But I, no,
You
no,
don't-
but I was saying,
you're
that,
not
like, but
having-
I'm proving, you know, talking about the same thing, like, if you look, the average housing prices in our surrounding towns are generally, I would say, at or above the very top of our market. So, it's just additional context.
Yeah, yeah, triple that.
Twice, yeah.
This is a
Times
median.
that, yeah.
This is a median anyway. Yes, no, just for illustrative purposes. Yes.
Any other comments? Questions? No? Andrew?
When are we going to find out about our phase 2 money?
That's a great question.
Probably in the next week,
Excellent.
yeah. With
They're rolling the
work.
master plan, the master
Tuesday.
plan was rolled in that as well, right?
Yes. Holiday gift. Did you have a question?
No, I'm just waiting to see if there are any more. If there are no other questions, then thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Potentially hearing on that steps. Bill, did you have anything else that you wanted to say along these lines, or?
No. Everything else can wait. The only thing I would say before you adjourn is that Max, I'm gonna send Max's Excel spreadsheet. I just talked with him and then we'll send it out. And maybe we'll start on that.
And start from that.
Yeah, I made some tweaks to it, but I got ruined some.
All right. With that, then, do I hear a motion to adjourn? Motion has been made and seconded to adjourn. All in favor? All opposed? That's 5 in favor, none opposed. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.